So good evening and welcome. So I guess we got things set up here and working just in the nick of time. My name is Jim Coplien, and I'm coming to you from the far north in Denmark. And I'd like to welcome everyone who's here. Based on LinkedIn connections I've been getting, I guess a lot of you are from Turkey. Though I know that the SysArt folks are in Germany, and probably a lot of you also from Europe. I don't know if there's any friends out there. They're using a relatively old technology here, so I can't see who's present here. So I guess I'm just talking to a computer, but processes and tools over individuals and interactions. What can I say? So tonight is about Scrum Patterns. And these came about over the past 15 years. And I mean, patterns in general have been interest of the software community for about 25 or 30 years now. And they were inspired by an architect named Christopher Alexander, who was born in Austria and raised in the UK, taught in the UK, got his PhD in the UK, and has long lived in University of California, Berkeley. He passed away last year. So we finally lost him after many, many years. Very extreme, very philosophical architect. I mean, architect of buildings, not these folks who fancy calling themselves software architects, whatever that is. But he was one of the pioneers in the design movement, and a lot of the theory of design that evolved in the 1980s and 1990s, broadly in society, and of course, a lot of it has influenced computer science. Computer science also has gone through a lot of changes, from pretending it was something formal and mathematical to something more artistic, and now something kind of in between that's humane and draws a lot of psychology. And that has to do with software design. But the same is true for designing organizations, and even more so with organizations, because organizations are, of course, about people. And people are not simple machines, do not respond as machines do. They have feelings, opinions, and are quirky. So, yet they are somewhat predictable in their interactions, and they have some expectations. And we do know configurations of people that work. For example, for building a product. And we know these from research. We know these from observation. The problem is that computer scientists, or software people, I guess in general, since the 1950s, have been managed by people who traditionally have managed hardware products. And all they know how to do is manage things with obey the laws of physics and are eminently predictable. So they don't know how to deal with complexity, or what Agile calls emergence. And it wasn't until a lot of things came together in about 1990, where there was good individual computing technology that allowed individuals interacting with their own machines and having control over their own computing resources, together with the speed of computers that allowed fast turnaround. These things allowed people to organize themselves differently and work differently. They no longer had to stand in line for the card reader to put their cards in, or wait a day to get their output from the line printer, but could work individually and could start working together in teams rather than just having one person carrying a deck of cards or reading the printout. And Agile was born. Time went on, and eventually Scrum was born, invented by Jeff Sutherland, drawing a lot on some innovations that came from the Toyota production system, which goes all the way back, has its deep roots in the 1950s in Japan, or even the 1940s. And a lot of it evolved in the 1950s. And this evolved into what today we know as the Toyota production system, and total productivity maintenance, and total quality management, TQM. And these are the things that Jeff Sutherland used to create Scrum. In the meantime, Japanese manufacturing almost was the death knell of American auto manufacturing, and Chrysler and GM both almost went bankrupt in the 1980s, and again a few years later. And Toyota actually sent some consultants there to help them out because Toyota was afraid of being sued for monopolizing the market. And these consultants told Detroit a lot of things, and Detroit got very excited about them, and some researchers at MIT got very excited about them, and they became a concept which we know today as lean. And lean has grown into things like Six Sigma. We know a lot of lean things like Kanban. We know a lot of lean things like 5 Whys and root cause analysis, and it's all bullshit. It was basically a tool of the Japanese to try to mislead the Americans into doing things less efficiently so Japan could keep a monopoly on leadership. And indeed, Toyota is still the #1 car manufacturer in the world. Scrum did not come from lean. Scrum came directly from the Toyota production system. About 15 years ago, I got scared about Scrum, seeing that a lot of people were misunderstanding it or confusing it with lean or confusing it with Agile or confusing it with extreme programming. They were using a lot of practices which are indeed harmful, like test-driven development and on-site customer and things like this from extreme programming. And even the Scrum Guide was starting to miss really the core elements of Scrum. And I thought this is kind of the last chance to save Scrum and to build a body of literature that documents what Scrum really is. So I pulled together the top 20 Scrum people in the world. Jeff Sutherland, co-inventor of Scrum; Gabriella Benefield, one of the top trainers of Scrum from a UX point of view; Jens Østergaard, who's trained more people in Scrum than anyone else; Mike Beadle, who co-authored the first book on Scrum. People like this, 20 of them. And we spent 9 years putting together these patterns, formally meeting once a year and informally meeting much more often. So this is probably the most authoritative body of literature on what Scrum is and what Scrum isn't of anything that exists. Don't confuse Scrum with the Scrum Guide. And a lot of Scrum trainers, who were there from the early days have seen things that have crept into Scrum, into the Scrum Guide that we just shake our heads. So I'm glad we got this authoritative body of literature out. What I'm going to do tonight is just kind of tell you a little bit about the history and where things came from in these patterns. You won't learn all the patterns tonight, but what I want to do is make these things accessible to you, let you know where to find them. I mean, we've published a book, but I'm not here to sell books. This thing is mainly on the web. And kind of give you some tips on how to start using these to learn Scrum, get started in Scrum, or to improve your Scrum. I mean, even top world experts are going to find stuff in here to learn. The thing is that people who think they know Scrum actually don't. So a lot of you who are here have been asked to take this test. And it's an 8-question test. And here are the scores on the test. Now, about 90% of you are certified who took this test. And you're out there practicing Scrum. These are really, really, really basic, simple questions. And actually, you did very good. The mean score was just over half of the questions right. So about 4.2 was the average score, 4.2 out of 8. Usually the score is just under 4. It's just under 50%. So here you are, all of you, out there practicing Scrum, and you can't even get half of the questions right that are really simple, basic things. Now, this is a problem. This is a problem I saw happening here 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and was a reason saying we need an authoritative source so that people know what they're doing. I want to briefly go through these questions because you're probably all keen on knowing, what the results were. First question, what's the goal of the daily Scrum? And most of you answered to replan the work until the next daily Scrum, and that indeed is the right answer. A few of you said to answer the 3 questions. So the 3 questions aren't even there on the Scrum Guide anymore. And finish the sprint backlog at the end of the sprint. We'll talk some more about that. The product backlog is in what kind of order? All of you said priority order. And a few of you said in cost and value order, and hardly anyone said in delivery order. But the right answer is the product backlog is in delivery order. It's a list. The top thing on that list delivers first, then the thing after that, then the thing after that. And the product owner's job is to set up the order of delivery and to manage dependencies between items to make sure things deliver in the right order to the market to optimize long-term value. Priority order is ridiculous. Who's priority? Customer A, customer B, the board, the programmers? No, I mean, it's in delivery order. And something like 70% of you did not understand that. What is a product backlog? Most of you got this right. A list of descriptions of product features and deliverables. It is not requirements. There are no requirements in Scrum. There are no user stories in Scrum. So if you have user stories on the product backlog, you are not doing Scrum. What the product backlog is a list of tokens of product increments. It's a product backlog, not a requirements backlog. We don't manage requirements in Scrum. The product owner manages all the requirements stuff and delivers a vision of enabling specifications that drive the team in the direction that the product owner wants them to go. So it's mainly the product owner who's dealing with requirements. And of course, there is really no such thing as a requirement. A product backlog item is a hypothesis. You don't know if it's required. That presumes that you can do complete analysis. And in a complex world, you can't. We're dealing with complexity and unknowns. So all it is a list of descriptions of product features and deliverables that are hypotheses of what might solve problems in the market. The product backlog is a roadmap. No, it is not. A roadmap has alternatives. It has branching. Product backlog is linear. What is a sprint review? Your answers were kind of split between a broad review of the product, of how to improve it, and the demo, that you think it's a demo. Now, the demo is this very short, 20-minute thing, just to show, what features we finished this feature, with this sprint. What do you do with the other 2.5 hours? It's a review of technical debt. It's a review of our bug status. It's a review of the product direction. It's a review of how the product has been working in the marketplace. We're asking end users that feature we delivered to you 2 or 3 sprints ago. How is it using? So it's a wide-ranging discussion. It's not the demo. The demo is a very small part of it. What best describes the relationship between the PO and the dev team? A lot of you said the PO defines the product backlog and the developers, apply some checks and balances. But the real answer is, of course, that building that product backlog is a joint effort between the product owner and the developers. The product owner has veto power. Product owner has final word because the product owner is accountable for value, and the product owner cannot be held accountable if the product owner does not have control. What percentage of a sprint should a great Scrum team fail? Oh, this is a great question. So all of you think, oh, I have a great Scrum. So half of you said 0% should never fail. And about 4 of you said 25%. No. If you're an excellent Scrum team, you should fail 50% of your sprints, where fail is defined as not completing everything on the sprint backlog. If you are not failing 50% of your sprints, you're lying, you're cheating, you're cooking the books. Now, why is this true? I mean, you know what a burn down chart is, right? So here's a burn down chart. Velocity is about 235. It's a 3-week sprint. However, velocity is 235 plus or minus 20%. I mean, Scrum is about managing statistical processes, not just fixed numbers. There's always variance in the process, and a key aspect of the Toyota production system is managing variance. A key job of the Scrum Master is to reduce variance. So the sprint can end up anywhere in this blue cone of uncertainty. Now, if I look at where sprints go, they're kind of evenly distributed, or maybe there's a Cauchy distribution or a normal distribution with most of them ending up, on the velocity and a few less and a few more. But the point is, for any of these distributions, well-behaved distributions, half of the sprints will finish early. And if you keep going down the sprint backlog, you deliver more. You don't have to keep going down the sprint backlog. You can take the days off or do process improvement or do something else. But half of the sprints will not finish everything on the sprint backlog. The goal of a sprint is not to deliver everything on the sprint backlog. The goal of a sprint is to meet the sprint goal. And those are different things. However, it is also nice to deliver everything on the sprint backlog. And here we have leakage, a lot of stuff that's not delivered half the time. We want to minimize that. How do we minimize that? We decrease the variance. This comes from Deming, who helped the Japanese in the post-war construction to get a handle on process control and statistical process control. So now, with the variance less, what percentage of the sprints fail? Well, 50%. Half the sprints will deliver more and half of them don't finish. However, the leakage is cut in half. So you should be failing 50% of your sprints. If not, you don't understand velocity, you don't understand sizing, and you don't understand Scrum, and you certainly do not understand variance. Now, given the answers to these questions, and given that some of you are Agile coaches, and given that 90% of you are practicing Scrum, this is pretty scary. Okay? What's the value of certification and managing projects? I can't fool you. It doesn't make no difference in anything. So a little more on scores. Overall, you got 53.6, I guess, in any school or university. That would be a failing score. So, I mean, you should all turn in your Scrum badges and go back to school. That's what the Scrum Pattern book is about. Getting you tool to really understand what's going on instead of just falling back onto all the things you've always been doing and equating them with what you hear in Scrum, because that's what you're doing. It turns out that the certified people here did just about the same. The reason is that 90% of the people who took the exam were certified, so there's not a lot of variance. It turns out the non-certified people, there were only 2 of them, did marginally better, but it's only like in the second decimal point. And this is a pattern. I mean, whenever I offer this little exam, and I've offered this, to about 1,000 people now, so I have scores across a fairly large population. The non-certified people do better than the certified people. Go figure. Scrum Alliance people usually do the best, or usually, they usually do second best. Usually who does the best is scrum.org, but in this case, scrum.org did really bad. So they only got, they got exactly 50%. There were not too many scrum.org people, but they scored significantly worse than Scrum Alliance, which is unusual. But I mean, the SAFE people are clueless, and this is also repeatable again and again and again. I mean, SAFE has really nothing to do with Scrum. So anyhow, these are the scores, and this is the motivation for having these Scrum patterns, is that there's just a dearth of knowledge about what Scrum is. By the way, at any time, you can put comments or questions in the private chat. I see Khalil. Oh, hi, Khalil. Yeah, has entered something, but other than that, there isn't anything yet. So what is a pattern? So the whole approach behind patterns means that I want to give you a menu, and you can choose a la carte what you're going to do to solve problems, rather than someone telling you need to install exactly these kind of things. And you have this spreadsheet you need to check off and make sure you're doing all of these things to know whether you're doing Scrum? I mean, the fact is you cannot look at a team and tell whether it's doing Scrum. You can't. So it's not a matter of following some checklist. Scrum is a test instrument. It's something there to allow you to understand where problems arise so that you can fix them. Patterns allow you to fix things incrementally. We'll talk later about pattern languages. They're kind of a roadmap that tells you the order in which you should introduce these patterns in order to move toward an ever improving Scrum process and an effective delivery and happy team. So it's not like you take a Scrum course and then, take it on Thursday and Friday, and on Monday you go and you turn on Scrum and expect to do the whole thing. But you do things a little at a time. Let's call that approach Agile. So you want to change your process in an Agile way too, not just use a process to change your product in an Agile way. A lot of the Scrum community is based on certification. You're considered an expert if you have a Scrum Master certification. The truth is, and I think this exam just shows it, that the certification has no correlation to knowing up from down. I mean, 90% of you are certified. You've taken some certification, and you got 50% on this exam of sample questions. So maybe your trainer was training you to answer the questions on the exam rather than to understand what Scrum is. So this is raising the bar. I mean, the bar has been set very, very low by the Scrum Alliance, by Scrum.org, by the Agile Alliance, by the certifying communities. And what I want to do is raise the bar for people's knowledge and what they're aspiring to do with Scrum. So this is about developing, grounded understanding. Not just, that I'm going to do it because it's in some book, but I want you to understand why you're doing what you're doing. And at least you should know as a starting point what Scrum says. And most people who are practicing Scrum don't even know that. So, I mean, all you need to do is look on the web. I mean, have a look at this web page. I didn't check today that it was still there. But it's a guide by some consultants about what you should do to run a daily, the daily Scrum ceremony. And it says, the task whip limit is 1 per person. That's bullshit. The task whip limit is 1 per team. A Scrum team swarms. That's what Scrum is. The entire team works on one product backlog item at a time. This is the only thing that distinguishes Scrum from other approaches. This is based on one-by-one construction from Toyota or single-piece continuous flow. So this thing on their little checklist is just utter bullshit. Suggested agenda for the daily Scrum. There's no agenda at the daily Scrum. People just discuss, and move the cards around on the board saying, what are we going to do first? What are we going to do next? What we're going to start pair programming on? Story by story review. No, you don't review these things. And there are no stories anyhow, starting with the most complete, and plan for the day. Impediments review, action, and owner. No, you do not review impediments at the daily Scrum. The only reason you even mention impediments is to understand how they're going to affect your plan for the day. You do not solve or even discuss impediments at the daily Scrum, except to the degree they're going to affect the day's plan. The purpose of the daily Scrum is to plan the sprint, not to solve the impediments, not to have a group hug, not to do status reporting. It's to plan the day. It's an extension of sprint planning. Determine the paired programming pairs for the day. No, that's bullshit. I mean, the point is I can find hundreds of these. And so there's so much misinformation out there. Now, a lot of you probably also think you know what patterns are because you read the Gang of Four book. And when they were writing this book, I told them, hey guys, these aren't patterns. Because I was working with Christopher Alexander. He was a pattern guy. And I understood what they were. And Alexander, of course, he's the one who brought them into the 20th century. He knew what they were. And what these guys were doing for the Gang of Four book, they're not patterns. And I said, these aren't patterns. And they said, yeah, but the book is selling very well. So finally, Richard Helms sends me this mail in 2004. This is 19 years ago. It says, can't recall the last time we spoke or met, but it's been ages. So I have a confession. I finally understood what you were talking about. I finally understood what you meant when you said, these aren't patterns. It was a long, tortuous route. I had to go through some universal properties of software like scale freedom and small worldness. A bit slow I am sometimes, but got there in the end. So if you think a pattern is one of those things in the Gang of Four book, forget it. Now, I'm not going to spend time defining patterns tonight. It's taken me 30 years to understand what patterns are, and I don't think I'm going to get you guys there tonight. But I think you'll have a hunch. A couple important things. A pattern is something you build. So it's not just an algorithm. It's not a process. And what you build has a geometry. And the thing we're building is a process. It's the building blocks of a process and of an organization that we're going to put together. And the individual building blocks are the patterns. These are the deep structure of the organization and its process. So that's fundamentally what a pattern is. There's a lot of other properties, and we'll talk a little bit about those. Here's Eric Gamma, another one of the Gang of Four, who also said, well, okay, yeah, Coplien was right that, what we wrote was not patterns in the Gang of Four book. So, I mean, here's two of the authors. I think Ralph Johnson never really understood, and I think probably John Lascides, who was the fourth author, probably never understood before he died. He died several years ago. But the other two authors get it. I mean, the Gang of Four book is not patterns. So just to kind of tease you about what a pattern would be, here's a pattern. This is a pattern written by a guy named Ward Cunningham. Now, Ward's a cool guy. He invented something called the web, as in Wikipedia. So he's into writing, for example, and publication on the web. So he has this pattern he wrote called 10-word line. We can see here that the pattern name is in small caps. This is a convention that pattern people use. So it's just a thing. It's the thing we build. It has a very short name. And here's a pattern called 10-word line. So what's a pattern say? The human eye moves in discrete motions ending in periods of ka-ching, detail observing stability called fixes. A proficient reader, ka-ching, interprets several words with each fix across a line. However, ka-ching, when returning to the left margin, several fixes can be wasted, ka-ching, locating the continuation of a sentence. So if those ka-ching, your eye has to move across the page and find its way. That costs time. It costs muscle energy. It makes your eyes tired. Therefore, compose text into lines averaging 10 words or less for casual reading and even narrower for speed reading. When formatting an A4 page, use 2 columns. When reading text-rich web pages, like this, which was originally on a web page, resize your browser to narrow the column width to within the 10-word limit. Really, try it now. Consider formatting web pages within tables of specified point width so your reader will not have to adjust their browser. Then he has a sketch, a picture. Every pattern has a picture. Patterns are about the human visual cortex. The visual cortex is a massively parallel computer in your head. It is what helps us understand form or understand structure. So it's a thing we build. It's not a process. And he's showing, here's a 10-word line. Here are 10 words. Here's a picture of it. He says, set your browser to make all and only the dashes on one line. Then you'll have a 10-word line. Then you have implemented this pattern. And so it's not just an analysis where we're going to break down a problem or break down requirements and do some formal analysis. The solution is kind of sneaky. It's called an emergent solution. It emerges from the combination of a lot of actions put together. This is systems thinking. We're attacking systems problems or problems that have their roots in systems causes, not just local little things. We want global optimizations, not just local patchworks. Another pattern, developing in pairs. What are we building? We're building a group. It's a group of two. That's part of the form or structure of an organization. Now, this pattern was in a very early book on patterns called Organizational Patterns of Agile Software Development that Neil Harrison and I published in about 2001. And this was based on many years of research of seeing what worked in real software organizations. So I traveled all over the world and studied, and I mean research, using social network analysis tools, making sociometric models of organizations to find out what makes them tick, what works. And we found this. Good organizations have this pattern developing in pairs. Now, a pattern has three parts. It has the name, and then there's a context. So the context here, what's the context in which a problem arises? Software development is mistake prone. And then there's a discussion of the trade-offs. Why is this a difficult problem? To try to motivate that there's a problem here. Well, reviews are insufficient. And then there's a solution, usually following the word therefore. So allow, but don't force people to work in pairs. Oh, I'm sorry, I saw some things pop up in the question. As a team member, how can I increase my performance at cross-functional tasks? I'm not sure what the question means. The team is cross-functional. A team is more likely to be cross-functional if more people are multi-skilled. So if the team already can cover everything that needs to be covered, you don't have to do anything. You just jump in and do what you can do. If sometime the team gets stuck, like they find they don't have enough testers, well, you can help solve that problem by learning testing. Because some people will say, oh my gosh, I'm a database person, I can never do testing. No, that's bullshit. Learn testing. Anyone can learn anything. There's a great book called Mindset by Carol, I can't remember her last name now. But she's done a lot of research. She's a psychologist. And I mean, there's this myth of born talent. It's just a myth. For the superstars in any group, yeah, having inborn talent matters. But for being competent at something, I mean, anyone can learn to play the violin. Anyone can learn to play basketball, unless they have, some handicap. So this is about learning. Scrum is about learning. So you should always learn. Don't stand on your credentials. Don't stand on your diploma. Don't stand on your specialization. Milos, hi. I see Milos is here. Milos, you're always showing up. Thanks for being here. All right. So developing in pairs is a pattern. Patterns are time-proven forms. So how about the pattern? What one is this about? Programming in pairs? Yeah. So programming in pairs is a pattern. Tom Gilb says, oh, this is a pattern. Yeah, this was a concept invented by Jim Coplien in 1995. Well, I can tell you it existed before 1995, and I'm not the person who invented it. So sorry, Tom, you're wrong. Trygve Renskog, a friend of mine, he invented something interesting called Model View Controller, said, Annalisa Score and I did a large 75,000 lines of Smalltalk code project using literate programming and pair programming in the late 1980s. Okay, well, it goes back at least to the 1980s. Larry Constantine, and the young people here won't know who he is, but I mean, the older people here, I mean, he's a god of computer science. He's one of the fathers of structured programming. Said, well, his name comes up with it because he wrote about it in an article long before Agile, but he said it certainly wasn't me who invented it. I heard about it from PJ Plogger, who was using it at Whitesmith's compilers. And another one of these gods of computer science, Ed Jordan, the late Ed Jordan, said, yeah, it was definitely PJ Plogger. He was instrumental. There's this wonderful little story here. He was instrumental in persuading me to get Unix in our company, which had a $10,000 license fee at the time. And Plogger lent us the money, interest-free. And we were using dumb typewriter terminals, and they cost a lot. And so we couldn't afford to get many of them. So we had to share them. And so Plogger said, well, I'll loan you the money as long as you pair up and share the terminals. And he says, well, that's how pair programming was born. A lovely little story. Then I talked to my friend Jerry Weinberg, who, again, he just died last year too. And he said, well, I learned to pair program on paper. We didn't even have terminals back in the 1950s in Los Angeles for Bernie Dimsdale, who learned it from John von Neumann. I don't know if it has any history before then, but that's way back to the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in the 1940s, where they were building missiles. I went back to Ed, and Ed says, well, it's got to go all the way back to Charles Babbage or Lady Lovelace. Yeah, I'm sure they were doing something. I also asked people like Brian Kernighan, and he says, I have no recollection of any of the history of pair programming, and I certainly have no involvement with it at all. So he said he and Dennis Ritchie programmed individually. So I mentioned the sections of a pattern. So let's go through another pattern, the daily Scrum. This is something else we build. It's a little organization. It's a temporary organization that comes and goes every day. And it's just the developers. Should the Scrum Master be there? Why? It's a developers meeting. Why do I want the Scrum Master there? I don't want a Scrum Master at the daily Scrum. That's a waste of their time. How about the product owner? Maybe if the team invites her. But no, I don't need a Scrum Master at the daily Scrum. Everyone thinks that the Scrum Master runs the daily Scrum. I don't even want them there. It's a developers meeting. So again, this starts with a pattern. And in the book, patterns have numbers. This is pattern number 29. And sometimes it's useful to have these numbers. This is ... which means this is a continuation of a longer process of building a Scrum organization. So here we are in the middle of a long story of building the Scrum organization. We're now building the daily Scrum. So this is the context. It's kind of like a story. We're telling a little story here. Once upon a time in a land far, far away. This is the context. So a Scrum team, you notice Scrum team is in small caps. That's another pattern. That's part of the context. What patterns have already been developed and installed and are in action? This is what context means. So here we're relating the context. A Scrum team has been formed and it's ready to start or has started a sprint. There's another pattern. As such, the Scrum team has created a sprint backlog, another pattern, and is working to achieve the sprint goal, another pattern. Yet in the words of Field Marshal von Moltke, no plan of operations extends with any certainty beyond the first contact with the main hostile force. So this is kind of the introduction. Then we have 3 stars, ... End of context. Now we go into the forces. This is like, it's like a play. We've now set the stage for the play. We've seen the scenery. We know where this is taking place. Now we're going to start to develop the plot. We're going to start to have the conflict. What are the things that are pulling back and forth? Well, the team makes progress in the sprint by finishing sprint backlog items, but given the complexity of the work, the characteristics, size, and quantity of tasks change frequently, sometimes minute by minute. Because of the changing nature of the work, the team needs to adopt a new ordering at least once a day to move beyond mediocrity. On the other hand, too much replanning or re-estimating wastes time and suffocates developers. But too little replanning or re-estimating leads to blockages that cause delays or obsolete plans that no longer represent reality. Oh my gosh, this is a hard problem. So the forces are trying to lay bare what the challenge is here. And then we have the solution, which is kind of a miracle. and it slices through these forces and allows them to resolve themselves. So this is not an active force where we come in with a nuclear bomb. It's just a way of gently or lightly touching things so that things fall into balance. So the solution is to have a short event every day to replan the sprint, focusing on the next day. Strictly time box the meeting to keep focus on the daily plan and to avoid robbing time from development. Keep the meeting to 15 minutes or less. The team manages itself. There's no Scrum Master there. And the Scrum Master, if the Scrum Master sees this as a recurring problem, well, then the Scrum Master will step in and point out, hey, you guys are taking too long. Many teams stand during the meeting to emphasize the short duration of the meeting. So that's the daily Scrum. Nothing about reporting. Okay? Nothing about solving impediments. It's replanning the sprint. It's an extension of sprint planning. A little more to the solution. In order to plan, you got to know where you are, as well as what problems are standing in the way, and you need a complete picture. One approach is for each person in the development team to answer these 3 questions. Now, like I said, we've taken the 3 questions out because too many people use these to turn the meeting into a status reporting meeting. But if you're just starting out and you have nothing else that you know how to do, you can use these 3 questions. And then ... We're done with the solution. Now we have a little discussion. Why does this work? And what comes next? Does this cause problems? Do we need more patterns in order to solve the problems, in order to patch up what this one does? So there's a little discussion here about it helps the team develop a sense of identity, brings them together to focus. It reinforces team pride. And it's a daily version of another pattern called face-to-face before working remotely. This is called the resulting context. So these are the sections of a pattern. The name, there's always a picture, a little sketch, just like those dots. Again, we want something that represents the form, the thing we're building. There's the context, the forces and the problem, and then the solution and the resulting context. Those are the sections of a pattern. Okay, so that's what a pattern is. Now, what is Scrum? So it's a framework, like all the books say, right? And for what? For building a product? Well, we all hate projects. It's for building a product, right? No, Scrum doesn't build products. Scrum builds a process and an organization. And the organization uses that process to build a product. So what we're building here, we sometimes call this the whole with a W, okay? In order to comment, I have to connect and log in to Google. Well, forget that. Okay. Oh, it's so wonderful when instead one uses modern technology instead of things like this. All right. So the wholes that we're building, WHOLE, are an organization. So we want to say, what are the building blocks of that organization? Well, there's obvious ones like the Scrum team and the product owner and the Scrum Master and so forth. And then there's another whole, which is the process. What are the building blocks of the process? So the building blocks of the process are things like the product backlog and the sprint backlog and the product increment. And they line up in order to support me building the process that I will use to build that product. Oh, lost my window. There it is. So the process and organization build a process. Now, let me go back here. The whole that we build for the organization, I mean, it's kind of an organizational chart, but it's an empirical organizational chart. It's a picture of how the people are connected to each other. How do I mean connected? Do they depend on each other? Do they converse? Does their work interact? Is there a dependency? So that's the form we want to focus on, because we want people to be able to work autonomously without interference from the others. But we also want people to have free access to the whole system information so everyone can work in the context of the entire system. So we have cross-functional feature teams as one of the main building blocks. The flow of the process is sometimes called a value stream. Now, this is something that's not from the Toyota production system. This is a lean thing, but it's kind of a nice metaphor for how the processes connect with each other in order to build this whole along which the product travels. So the product starts with raw materials, with specifications, with developers, with needs, and those things flow into the value stream, and the product owner and developers work on them as they flow down the value stream, and a product increment flows out the bottom of the value stream. Along the value stream, we find things like a product backlog and a sprint backlog and other parts of that value stream that build the value stream. So we have two wholes here. Now, really, they're both part of the same whole, but it's very difficult for someone with a Western upbringing to be able to see how space and time fit together. And this is kind of an artifact of Western culture. I mean, to the Japanese, time is just kind of a different kind of space. And so there's this unity between space and time. It shows up in Japanese words like ma, which is untranslatable into English. So for the Western mind, we broke this out into two pattern languages, one which is for the organization and another which is for the process. But really, there's only one language there. It's building one whole, which is the Scrum team. The patterns have to be applied, or we recommend you apply them in a sequence, and you apply only one pattern at a time. This graph is a roadmap of the patterns and the suggested order or precedence in which you should apply them. And kind of the rules of the game here is you can apply any pattern as long as its parent patterns are applied. Other than that, you can apply them in any order. So this is just showing the dependencies between the patterns. Every pattern depends on the ones above it, where there are arrows. And there's no prize for the most patterns. I mean, you pick the patterns that are going to help balance the forces that you've got. But you want to make sure the context is valid. That is, that all the patterns above the pattern you're thinking of are already resolved. So this is a roadmap. If you think about this, this kind of forms a grammar. If you view the nodes in this graph as words in a grammar, this defines a grammar and how you can put the words together in useful and meaningful ways. We'll talk more about that later. I'm trying to understand Milosha's comment here. Oh, I see. You're answering. Okay, never mind. Okay. Here's another pattern language. This is the one for the value stream. So we have two pattern languages in this book. One that guides us into building the organizational structure, and the other that guides us in building the process, the value stream. And there's roughly 40 of each, 40 or 50 of each. And there's a suggested order, but you can choose your own order. I mean, there's no Scrum police. And you know better than some book or some 20 authors sitting around a table drinking port wine about what your needs are than they are sitting 1,000 miles away. So these are there to inspire you. When you're reading those forces, you'll think, aha, I understand. Oh, I know what to do. And then you read the solution. The solution says something else. What do? You follow your heart. The pattern has done its job by making the solution understandable and visible to you. And even though it's not the same as what the book suggests, it's that context and those forces that have done their job in helping you discover something you knew that you didn't know that you knew. That's the purpose of a pattern. So it's not a roadmap to be literally followed. It's there for inspiration to put you in touch with your instinct. It's instinct that has been lost because you're slavishly following your certification, your academic training, your specialization, and your degrees, which is the same reason you're only getting 50% on this exam of 8 stupid, simple questions. Because you're not thinking. And by thinking, I mean thinking with your heart. I don't mean doing a formal Aristotelian logical analysis of the problem. You have instincts that lead you in the right direction, and these patterns are there to awaken your instincts. What are some of the patterns? Let's talk about some of them. Here's one of the value stream patterns. And this one I've shown a little more fully as it appears in the book. Again, I have the title. It's in small caps. It's pattern number 54. The picture here is of wine barrels, and each one has a date on it. So these are ordered, and they can be, sent for bottling, at the end of their aging. And these are put on the shelf and ordered depending on the aging. So I want to put these barrels in the order of delivery, not in the order of priority. So what's a pattern? So you define a value stream that meets the product owner's vision and helps it to flow to market. The development team needs guidance on how to interact with the product owner to achieve that vision. So it's important that the whole team is aligned about what it's going to deliver and that everyone is on board to that. And the development team can't do everything at once. It has to do things one at a time. But you do need to maintain focus. Therefore, for each product, create a single ordered list called the product backlog, a list of product increment contributions called product backlog items, not requirements, not user stories. Okay? Oh, by the way, that means that anyone who's using Jira, you're not doing Scrum, because Scrum, Jira manages user stories. There's no user stories in Scrum. User story is a requirement, and we don't manage requirements in Scrum. Jira has the least understanding of Scrum of anything on earth. They're clueless about what Scrum is. Because if you're using Jira and you're swearing by it, you certainly do not understand Scrum. Okay, product backlog is an ordered list of tokens representing product increments. It leads toward the product owner's vision, or what today is called the product goal in Scrum. So each product backlog should contribute to that product increment. So this is the pattern product backlog. It's one of the building blocks of the Scrum's value stream. You notice the product increment contributions? There's no user stories. It contains product increments. And product backlog items are not deliverables. Each Scrum sprint has one deliverable, and it is the sprint goal. So if you don't finish all the PBIs, no problem. If you don't finish the sprint goal, it's a failed sprint. And you should do what the Japanese call hansei, shame, regret, repentance. What did we do wrong? We did not meet the sprint goal. The sprint goal is sacred. And it's ordered in delivery order. So again, these are some things that a lot of you got wrong in the exam. Birds of a feather. This is an organizational pattern language pattern. This is something else we build. These are groups, the temporary groups. So everyone who's interested in testing, well, they may get together and talk about testing. Or everyone who's programming in C#. You may have a C# birds of a feather, and everyone gets together and talks about .NET or C#. You see, Scrum does not have an organizational structure for advancing core competencies. So what you need is some other structure that cuts across the Scrum team structure, where people of like mind, that is birds of a feather, can come together and advance these core competencies. So the main organizational structure, of course, supports interactions for product development, because that's kind of the number one purpose. Core competencies are also important to success and often are not properly nurtured. Therefore, create a structure orthogonal to the development structure to support professional association and work. Now, most Scrum teams should probably fire their managers. There's a company in Germany where I went in and met with the CEO and 50 of his directors about going to Scrum. And he said, oh, we're very agile. Well, the guy who brought me in later got the CEO fired. They fired the 50 directors. There's now no managers. The company is run by Scrum teams. It's run by product owners. This is Bosch IoT. They fired all the managers. They fired the CEO. Now, if you do have managers, managers manage people. They don't manage product. Maybe you can put a manager in charge of the C# group to help career development for the people who want to do a career in C#. And the manager is helping work with that person. So if you're looking for a place to put managers, they can head up these birds of a feather group. It's a structure orthogonal to the Scrum group structure, to the Scrum team structure. But it's a structure. It's part of form. It's part of the organizational architecture. In some sense, patterns are about architecture. Alexander used them for building architecture. Scrum Patterns is using them for the architecture of the organization, for the architecture of the value stream. And the birds of a feather structure is part of that architecture. It's a different part of that architecture than the Scrum teams. Swarming. This is the number one pattern of Scrum. This is what makes Scrum work. This is what makes Scrum different from anything else. So this is about teamwork. And it's about getting things done. And things they don't get done because people don't focus. They'll work on something and put it on the shelf and go on to something else. Or they'll try to develop several things at a time. And not everyone's working on the same thing at a time. And we know very well that multitasking is extremely inefficient. Therefore, in Scrum, we focus maximum team effort on one item in the sprint backlog and get it done as soon as possible. So the whole team works on one product backlog item, which has become a sprint backlog item, at a time. We don't split the work up. So we don't manage work in progress. Yes, there's a work in progress limit in Scrum. It's one product backlog item per team at a time. So if you're using Kanban and Scrum, you don't know what you're doing. It's absolutely meaningless. Managers actually manage people in interdepartmental processes? No, interdepartmental processes manage themselves. You don't need a manager to manage that. That's top-down control. If I need to coordinate with another group, I just walk over to that group. If it's strategic and we need to have a long-term commitment to coordination, we build something else. And that thing that we build to coordinate between departments is called a Scrum of scrums. That's another pattern. You don't put a manager there. The teams self-organize. You see, this is why we did these patterns, because people will say things like, well, managers actually manage people in interdepartmental processes. No, they don't. There are no departments in Scrum. There are Scrum teams, and Scrum teams manage themselves. And they manage interactions between themselves. If it's strategic, great. We create a Scrum of Scrums, which becomes the locus of the management of that interaction. Teams are self-managing, no managers. This is why Scrum is a paradigm shift. And this pattern language is trying to get you in touch with that. So, when you read the pattern, you're going to have a hard time saying things like managers actually manage people in the interdepartmental processes. I mean, that's poppycock. So there's a big learning to go on here, and we do this one step at a time. Individual teams work as one mind. This is what swarming is about. To swarm, you need a cross-functional team. So swarming depends on cross-functional team, because everyone that you need, all the competencies you need, have to be there on that team. Otherwise, the team can't swarm. So there's a lot of these patterns that interact and depend on each other very intimately. Swarming is probably the most important pattern in Scrum, and hardly nobody does it. Good housekeeping, another pattern. So velocity is limited because the team spends time dealing with too many bugs. So keeping a bug list causes numerous problems. I mean, I had a client once that had a bug list of 2,200 P1 issues in Jira. In Scrum, we don't track bugs. We fix them now. When a bug comes up, bugs always become number one priority. If you find a bug, you drop what you're doing, you fix that bug now. And then when you're done fixing it, you go on. We have zero defect tolerance in Scrum. This is about delivering quality. And people will complain and say, oh, well, what if it's just a little bug? The problem is little bugs hide big bugs. You can't test enough to know whether a bug is a little bug. You don't know your customer well enough to know whether a bug is a little bug. So for bugs in software, no. If we know there's a bug, we fix it now. Good housekeeping. Always wash the dishes after every meal. How do you know how much work to pull into a sprint? I mean, if you pull too much work, there's a lot of planning and estimating and stuff. It's a lot of waste. But if you don't pull enough into a sprint, then you're left in the middle of the sprint done, and you could have done a lot more. So it's useful to know how much work to pull into a sprint to meet the team's capacity for work. That requires estimation. A good way to manage estimation and to manage the capacity that a team works on is called yesterday's weather. A good way of predicting tomorrow's weather is saying it'll be the same as today. You'll be right 65% of the time. A good way to predict what you'll be able to deliver next sprint is to say it'll be the same as this sprint. So we use the last sprint or the trend of the most recent 2 or 3 sprints to determine how much work to take into the next sprint. This is called yesterday's weather. Another one was a property of a product backlog item, an enabling specification. This is a term from patent law. So a product backlog item is a conversation. It's a discussion between the product owner and the developers. It is not something in Jira. It is not something on a piece of paper. It's a conversation. All that thing in the product backlog is an administrative token. At the end of that conversation, the developers should have perfect understanding of what it is they're going to build and deliver. So that specification enables the team to deliver. The product owner has the job of getting the team enabled as a sign that the product owner has done due diligence. A user story is just, waving your hands. It's not even solution. It's in the problem space. So there's no user stories in Scrum. Yes, we use the word specification, and the product owner has the accountability to deliver enabling specifications to the team. This one is pretty involved. I don't think I'll go into it in detail. This is from Jeff. This is illegitimos non interruptus. But it basically says, if you have a really, really, really high reliability product, you can't afford bugs, then now you can actually manage your bugs. And what you do is you measure what your normal bug arrival rate is, the rate at which bugs normally arise. I mean, they're always going to be bugs. You're never going to make them go to zero. And understand what an acceptable level of bug arrival rate is. You pay attention to that during the sprint. If the arrival rate goes outside that window, something is broken. You're getting bad specs, a tool is broken, or something. Your quality is in jeopardy. Stop the sprint. Abort the sprint. Look around. See what's wrong, because you're about to deliver shit. So it's a relatively advanced pattern, high discipline pattern for very advanced Scrum teams. And there's a few of these in the book. A simpler one, dependencies first. Product backlog, of course, is ordered in dependencies. A good rule of thumb, if you're halfway through the sprint and you're still rearranging things in the product backlog to account dependencies, you don't understand what you're doing. Abort the sprint. You're not going to make it. Your dependencies should all be in hand by mid-sprint. So dependencies are really important. And last, the meta Scrum. This is what managers do. Managers run the corporation. They pay the electric bill. They make sure the doors are locked at night. They provide you a nice building. They have a nice cafeteria. The job of managers is to be uber Scrum masters for the team. And if the team has a problem that's holding up the sprint, there's an escalation process in Scrum. And that escalation goes up to the managers in about an hour. And if something is holding up the sprint, managers can bring out the big guns. They have the money, they have the power. That's the purpose of the meta Scrum. The real purpose of the meta Scrum is that, if all the managers are ex-engineers, these managers soon find out they really don't have any engineering authority. They can't steer the teams. The product owners are running the teams. They stop being managers and step down. And soon you have no managers left. So this is a drain the swamp pattern. So that's just a taste of some of the patterns. I guess maybe the more unusual patterns. Because, the simple stuff, you probably think you know. But these are some of the more subtle things that are really important for making a Scrum team work. Again, I can't join the chat here without going through a big process, but maybe, if you search on the web for just Scrum book, I think if you go to scrumbook.org or scrumplop.org, or maybe even scrumbook.com, most things you can think of will probably work and get you to the right website. Most of this book is online, and there are links between the patterns, some other supporting material. So try them out. Read through them and see, oh my gosh, here's a pattern we need. And, consider, do we have all of the context that we need? And consider doing that for your next retrospective and seeing if this will help move your team ahead. If you feel that you'd like us to come in and run a retrospective or run a Scrum course, this is a really excellent Scrum team growth opportunity. I think Milos here mentioned that that someone should get this in a I can't remember, what was it? Some kind of other forum, a podcast or something like that. And of course, I'm happy to do that too. Any questions? This is a terrible interface. I'm sitting here talking to a machine. I can't see your faces or anything. Guys, you got to use you got to use Zoom next time. Get some individuals and interactions going here. Any questions? I can't even tell if there's anyone there. Am I still connected? Okay, you said if we fix bugs now, if we find several bugs, what way should we follow to fix them now? Is there a prioritization? Scrum doesn't say. Why are you asking me? Why do you think that I might know more about this than you? I mean, I trust you as a professional, as someone who understands your business, and be able to assess, what the impact is going to be. I mean, the thing is, eventually you're going to have to fix them all. And so I think there's a trap here of saying, well, let's first fix the one that has the most risk to our customer. What I would do is look at this more from a development perspective and say, well, what order of fixing these is going to be the most efficient that will allow us to fix the most of them in time. They're really simple queuing theory properties here. I don't know if you know this, but if you look at the wait time for items in a queue, if you take the shortest one first, the average wait time per item is lower. It sounds like a paradox, but it's not. So, I mean, one strategy might be to fix the shortest ones first. Then the average wait time per fix is going to be lowest. But Scrum doesn't say. I mean, there's a lot of strategies to risk management. You can view Scrum as a risk management framework. And there's a lot of ways of using the tools of Scrum. I mean, you bring up bug fixes, but also just moving items up and down the backlog is a way of managing risk. So there's a lot in the patterns about using Scrum as a risk management framework. You have a team of developers belonging to different organizations with managers with conflicting interests. Well, let's see. How many ways is this wrong? Different organizations. What do you mean different organizations? When you use Scrum, the main building block is the Scrum team. And Scrum teams are self-selecting. So they come together and form, and usually they'll form around a product owner. There's a new book out. What's the name of this book? It's by an Australian woman, where they took a large Australian company and they reorganized the whole thing by having the product owners get up and give their pitch. And then they had, a few days of workshops where people signed up to join and form their own teams. There was no management assignment of team members. Just an open marketplace. And then, the Scrum teams are organizational structure. If you have a different organizational structure, of course, you're screwed. Why do you have a different organizational structure? Oh, I know, because you have managers who feel they need control of something, right? Fire the fucking managers. Why do you still have managers? Scrum teams are self-managing. Yeah, this takes courage. Courage, it's that Scrum value. Remember that? There are no development managers in Scrum. Full stop. If you have managers managing the development teams, you're not doing Scrum. You're doing project management with a daily status meeting. It really is a paradigm shift. You really need to think about this differently. To what degree can Scrum work in an organization that does not buy into the concept? So if you're a Scrum Master, your job is to educate that organization. This means clients. This means the CEO. This means the developers. And so you kind of have to decide, what it is you want out of life, and the company has to decide what it wants out of development. I mean, when I go into a company, I'm not there to help them suck a little less. I mean, I am not interested in a 10% or 20% improvement. I'm an existentialist. Okay? I want the full Monty. I want them really committed. We're going to do this right. And if they don't like that, I mean, oh God, what the heck? I mean, I got plenty of clients. I can go somewhere else. And the market is pretty good right now. If your organization doesn't like Scrum and you feel that the organization is missing out, I mean, go somewhere else. If, on the other hand, you feel in love with that organization and want to convert them and feel they're worth the trouble, it can be a long journey, educating them, taking a little step at a time, and it can take a long time, 5 years, 10 years. But it's up to you. And the strategies, I mean, there's many, many, many strategies for doing this. Can it work? Yes, it can work. Is it hard? Yeah, it's very hard. I might say, I mean, there's actually a benefit to having doubters in the organization. Because if everyone is, yeah, we love Scrum, these are the organizations where I find people, going off and doing things they don't understand. And they do it in the name of Scrum, and they use Scrum to justify it. And they end up doing, atrocious things and calling it Scrum. Like that slide I showed you for how to run a daily stand-up. I'm sure all of them feel they love Scrum. It's just they don't understand what it is. So I think healthy skepticism is extremely valuable. But it is a process of education. So you have a testing team from company A, a delivery team from company B. I ask people like this, are you married? And, do you and your wife live in the same house? I mean, eventually you leave your parents and you go and you live together. If the testing team is still living with daddy and the delivery team is still living with mommy, it's not going to work. Okay, see how this works? All right. How to plan and set goal for the sprint in the situation where bugs are sorted as product backlog. You don't have bugs in the product backlog. You don't have any bugs. We fix bugs now. How to estimate for fixing bugs? Ask developers. How long will it take you to fix this? Okay. How do you plan and set the goal? I mean, that's a business question. And there are goals at many levels. So, and this depends a lot in your business. So I think it depends a lot on the business you're on and what your company is trying to achieve. So, I mean, if I asked Toyota-san, the founder of Toyota, what's the purpose of building cars? When you founded the Toyota Motor Company. Well, is it to make money? No. Is it allow people to get from one place to another? No. What was the purpose in building Toyota? The purpose in Toyota is that the Japanese government had just embarked on a big road building program, and Toyota wanted to see those roads filled with Japanese-made cars instead of imported cars. It was about national pride. That was his purpose. What's your purpose? Make money? Get a salary? See, Scrum is about doing great things. It's about setting great goals. Can I define the term servant leader in the context of Scrum Patterns? The term servant leader is not used much anymore, really. So no, I won't define it. I will define leader. What's a leader? A leader is someone who has followers. So a Scrum Master clearly has to have leadership. I mean, they need people to follow her into making the process better. And the product owner is clearly a leader, leading the team into the direction of the product. Is the developer a leader? Sure. I mean, at some time they come up with an idea and a discussion that takes the team in some direction, a suggestion for how to fix things. And in a team that's in an energetic discussion of how to do design, leadership dynamically moves from person to person according to need. If your team has a team lead, it's a sick team. Leadership is not a person, it's not a position. It's a mantle dynamically that moves from one person to another according to need. That should probably give you enough to think about in terms of leadership. Assuming the team failed the sprint. By failed the sprint, I presume you mean did not meet the sprint goal due to an influx of bugs that they fixed immediately as per the housekeeping pattern. How would you maintain morale in that team? Well, they should be proud. They fixed bugs. They did the right thing. You see, you asked the wrong question. Here's the question you should have asked. Assuming the team succeeded in delivering the sprint by not fixing any of the bugs that arose and having the time instead to superficially meet the sprint goal, which allowed them to ship a product full of bugs to their marketplace, how in the hell would you maintain morale in that team for delivering shit? You see how this works? The team is more likely to feel pride about doing the right thing. Fixing the bugs is the right thing. They fail the sprint goal, they do answer. They say, okay, well, why didn't we meet the sprint goal? What can we do next time? You need to think very differently than a fearful manager who's afraid they will be held accountable for things like the team's delivery or something like this. As long as the team is doing the best it can, as long as the team trusts the process and trusts their instinct, I mean, you can't ask the team to do any better. This is a complex world. You can't prove that any of this stuff is going to work. I mean, prove with a capital P. So of course you fix the bugs. You're not going to deliver shit to your customer that might kill someone or cause all their money to get drained out of their bank account, or cause them endless hours of frustration trying to order something on the web, or cause their machine to crash. Oh, we met the sprint goal, though. Quality is more important than that. And if you don't understand that, you should maybe find another job. See how this works? See, software development is not an amoral activity. There is right and wrong. There is value. And we tend to treat it as a sterile thing that we just look up in the book and can follow the process. But Scrum is about people, individuals, and interactions over processes and tools. And the human value here is a happiness in working with something that works, that has high quality, not in the spreadsheet management of some team having met its sprint goal. And I think a good software development needs to be attuned to that, and it's pretty explicit in Scrum that that's a priority. Other questions? I'll be right back. I'm sorry, I had an alarm that went off. I had to fix that. Perhaps demonstrate one pattern sequence. I think that's a little bit beyond the scope of what we can do here tonight. But it's basically just, there are several patterns that you do in a role that build on each other. Like if you're going to do swarming, you have to have a cross-functional team. Cross-functional team you can build by doing a self-selecting team. You also need co-located team to do swarming. So you start with self-selecting team, make it a co-located team, make sure it's a cross-functional team, and now you can do swarming. So there's a sequence of 4 patterns in a row that line up to get you to the point where you can do swarming. Yeah, Dionysus says, I only addressed the leader part of my servant leader question. I explicitly said, no, I'm not going to define servant leader. We don't use that term anymore. It's not part of Scrum. You will not find it in the Scrum guide. You will not find Scrum trainers using it. It is not a term of Scrum anymore. So I said, I will not define it. I said, however, I will define the term leader. And I did that. Can Scrum be effectively implemented when team members aren't physically located? Sure, just like you can have a marriage when the people don't live in the same house. That can be an effective marriage, right? You're going to have a hard time having children, but it can be an effective marriage. So everyone's looking for yes, no answers. Can Scrum be effectively implemented when team members aren't physically located? Yeah, define effectively. How would you measure it? Can a marriage be effective if the husband and wife are not physically co-located? How would you measure it? I mean, I probably don't have to measure. I can probably tell you, well, it's probably going to be lacking a lot. And I think the same is true for a physically co-located team. Just find a Scrum Master who has a multi-site team and ask them how it is for that team to work and how that team is working, how effective it is. I talked to Scrum Masters about this and they're pulling their hair out. It's Amra, you have the best comment all night. Thank you very much. But it's very politically incorrect. Other questions? By the way, this is port wine I'm drinking. Port wine is the official drink of Scrum Patterns. And the reason is that we wrote the book largely at a port winery in Portugal. So whenever Patterns people get together, there's always a bottle of port around. So I thought I'd have a nice glass of port for this tonight. Other questions? Or, oh wait, is it worth getting a PSM3? All the research shows the certification makes absolutely no difference in anything. So I mean, it's not about getting certification. I don't even know what a PSM3 is. Basically, I mean, I'm not a Scrum.org person. I'm Scrum Alliance, and so Scrum.org is they're the evil enemy, right? They're our competitors. Frankly, my opinion, the Scrum.org program, their training, it's different than the Scrum Alliance program. In terms of the basics, I think it's a lot more fundamental, a lot more faithful to Scrum than the Scrum Alliance training is on the average. I mean, all these exam scores I'm getting point to that. But I also find that Scrum.org training tends to be what I call blue pill Scrum. And Scrum Alliance trainers tend to be what I call red pill Scrum. As in, do you want to take the red pill or the blue pill? So blue pill Scrum is kind of like, the incremental, follow the process, rename your project manager to a Scrum Master and rename your product manager to a product owner and do the daily stand up and say you're doing Scrum. Whereas Scrum Alliance, in the spirit of Jeff Sutherland, tends to be more wild and crazy things, like the kind of stuff we did at Bosch or the kind of stuff we're doing at other companies. So in general, I mean, I'm not really big on certifications at all. I mean, the way that you advance in Scrum is by trying stuff on your Scrum team, going out there in the wild, trying stuff out. Scrum is an experimental laboratory. Try stuff out, measure, and learn. When's the next pattern in Europe? I don't know. You can ask these guys from SysArt whether they want to try to set one up again. We were going to have one next month in Sweden, but I've told these guys, holding a class in one of the coldest countries in Europe and one of the coldest months of the year is probably not a good idea. So maybe they should set one up for April or May or something, or set it up in Portugal or in the French Riviera or something like that. I don't know. So currently there's nothing scheduled. I've been toying with the idea of having one in Ghent in Belgium in a couple of months, but I haven't done anything about that yet. So there's currently nothing scheduled. If you'd like to work with me, to do one inside your company, or have like Cesario and I come to your city and do one there, I mean, send me a mail and we can certainly set one up. See how it goes. What are the other comments here? Participating in the daily is very important to me to get the feel of the team. No, I mean, the Scrum Master is with the team and the team is co-located. You can get the feel of the team and just watching them work. You don't need a meeting for that. And they do mention impediments. They mention impediments during the day. I hear at the SysArt, should have not participated anymore. I mean, what you should do is just not announce the daily Scrum and see if the team gets together and replans their work. If not, then you're just their manager and you have the title of Scrum Master. And the only reason they're coming together is you're saying, we have a team meeting now, group, and you need to replan your work. And I'm going to watch over you and make sure it's replanned and, make sure that you're doing everything right. So, I mean, just decide not to show up one day and see if they replan. If not, you're not doing Scrum. The team is not self-planning. They're not self-organizing, right? They shouldn't depend on you being there. Now, that's the first step. But I mean, if they invite you to come because they need your support in resolving some kind of third-party impediment, from a supplier or from a manager in an outside company or something like that, then yeah. But I mean, wait until you're invited. Or maybe just show up once in a while to say, okay, well, there's this new thing coming up. We might consider that in your planning. But no, I mean, there's no reason for you to be at the daily Scrum. You see, certificates is mean to getting qualified by studying. No, this isn't about studying. This isn't stuff you find in a book. This is stuff, learning. Knowledge happens here. Learning happens here. Learning is a change in behavior. This is a complex system. It's not about head knowledge. It's not about book knowledge. It's not about the kind of stuff you can give a test about. We know this. There have been published surveys of project management professionals who, to a person, say project management certification makes no difference in my ability to do my job. So you see certificate as a means of getting qualified? Bullshit. There's no evidence of that, and a lot of evidence to the contrary. What's this, or Greece? Oh, Greece? Oh, that'd be nice. I have a partner in Greece, and we did just offer an internal Scrum Patterns class in Greece. Maybe I should write to them and say we should do one, either in Attica or up in Thessaloniki. I usually go there about twice a year. So this is with the Code Hub people. You know the Code Hub people in Athens? So they're our partner in Greece. Maybe there's a correlation between living in one of the coldest regions of the world and being some of the best at Scrum. Well, correlation is not causality, but there probably is correlation. If you look at the properties of an organization that's going to do Scrum, you want a very, very flat social structure. You want very low gender power distance. So you want a high degree of gender equality. And you look at the nations in the world that tend to have those properties. It tends to be the Nordics. It tends to be Iceland, Denmark, Sweden, to some degree Norway. And I mean, I think Mary Poppendieck has said, if you're doing Scrum, you want to be in Denmark. I mean, Denmark has all of kind of the personality traits broadly across the culture that you want to see in Scrum. And it may have something to do with us being a kind of a combination of monochronic and polychronic culture. Warm equatorial cultures tend to be polychronic, northern cultures tend to be monochronic. And we're, Denmark, we're kind of the Italians of the Nordic countries. We're kind of the southern ones. So, yeah, there's probably some kind of correlation there, Maru, but it's not causality. Unfortunately, we work remote. Fix it. You suck. What do you mean you work remote? Is your marriage remote too? I mean, come on. Thoughts on Kanbanizing a Scrum process and team, e.g. no sprint, but just next work columns by including the refinement? Well, there's a lot going on there. So Kanbanizing, Kanban is a technique. It was invented by Taiichi Ono for identifying what are essentially bottlenecks in the process, identifying inventory, making inventory visible. So if you need Kanban, you suck. I mean, to paraphrase Taiichi Ono, Kanban is something to be ashamed of, because if you need Kanban, it means you have inventory and you have handoffs. You don't have teamwork. So Kanban, no, is not something you should aspire to. So Kanban is one of these landmines that the Japanese sold to the Americans to slow them down. The goal of Kanban is to eliminate Kanban. The goal of Kanban is to eliminate inventory so you don't need Kanban anymore. Now, in terms of going away from sprints, it's very important to still have some kind of target, but there are some interesting things you can do. I mean, if you look at the original paper that inspired Scrum by Takeuchi and Nanaka, they talked about three kinds of development cultures. There's something called a type A culture, type B, and type C. So type A is very linear, with no overlap in delivery phasing. So you have a sprint, inputs come into the sprint, you have sprint planning, you do it, and you deliver, and it goes out. That's the Scrum Guide, by the way. I mean, Ken Schwaber made very sure that in the Scrum Guide, there's nothing anywhere in the Scrum Guide where you refer to another sprint from the current sprint. Okay, that's a type A Scrum. In type B, you're starting to look into the next sprint during the current sprint, starting to get the product backlog ready. So this is what things like backlog refinement are about, which used to be called grooming. And you're starting to prepare the next sprint. This is overlapping sprints. This is type B Scrum. So there the sprints overlap. You still have sprints, but they overlap. And then there's a type C Scrum. And I've only seen 2 of these in the world. So one is, so you start a sprint on Monday and it finishes on Friday. There's no sprint backlog. You only have a product backlog. So you pull from the top of the product backlog, you do brief discussion, and you implement. The whole team swarms, implements that thing. No sprint backlog. Same team starts another sprint on Tuesday, another one on Wednesday, another one on Thursday, and another one on Friday. Each one 1 week long. 5 sprints in parallel for each team. This is a type C Scrum. Don't do this at home. Next work column is called the product backlog. Already got that. That's part of Scrum. So I'm not sure what you're talking about. I mean, it kind of sounds like you want to use buzzwords like Kanban, but in Kanban, I don't think you understand Kanban. Kanban is just, it means you suck. It means that you have handoffs. It means you have inventory. Or that, I mean, if you start increasing the work in progress, which is what you're doing when you have Kanban. If you don't have Kanban, unless your WIP limit is greater than 1, then the team is working on multiple parts of the product at a time. Well, what if there's a dependency between the work of one team and another? Okay, well, that means that one of the sub-teams maybe has to stop until the other team catches up. Well, what if they stop? Now, what they're working on has become inventory. So Kanban creates inventory. You've created the problem that Kanban was trying to solve just by introducing Kanban. People just don't understand this because they understand these fancy words that Anderson likes to throw around without understanding what he's talking about and not looking at the principles of what the Toyota production system is about. So I suggest you spend a few years and understand the theory of TPS. There are many books you'll need to read, many of them in Japanese. This is not easy. The Japanese have taken many steps to obfuscate what the West knows about this. And it's a lot of work getting underneath that. That's one of the reasons for the Scrum Patterns book, is it goes back to the original ideas underneath this obfuscation. I mean, we're working with people who've worked at Toyota. I gave a keynote at the Toyota Software Developers Conference last November here in Europe. I'm working with these guys. All right? You know what they brought me in for? They brought me in to teach the Toyota production system to their software people. Toyota! I think I know what I'm talking about. Please stop throwing around these fancy Japanese words pretending you know what they mean, because you don't. And read the book. The stuff is in there. Other questions? Should we wrap it up? Who's running the show? So SysArt folks, are you there? Maybe not. Well, things seem to have gone dead here. So I think what I will do is thank you all. Oh, you are there. Okay, so where are we at?